Hi. microKORG 2 is officially here and in production. I already compared a prototype of it to the original microKORG in a previous video. In this video, I'll explore what the production version looks and sounds like, and how it competes in today's market. Before I start, a quick disclosure: Korg sent me the microKORG 2. Other than that, no money changed hands, they have no say over the content of this video, and don't get to see it before it's published. Okay, let's start with an overview. First, on the more superficial side, as of now, there's a mass market and less expensive microKORG 2 in a metallic color, which looks exactly as shown in my in-depth comparison video. And then a limited edition special black and white versions, the differences being beside the color that the program select dial and the pitch and mod wheels are aluminum or aluminium, depending on where you're from, and these also come with a soft carrying case. The price difference between the two tiers may be different when you watch this, but I think the plastic knobs and wheels on the regular metallic microKORG 2 are fine, so it's really about the soft case and the limited edition color if that's important to you. On the synth side, they're identical. microKORG 2 has 8 voices, each voice with 3 oscillators and a noise generator, a morphing filter, 2 envelopes, 2 LFOs, and a 6-slot mod matrix. And then you can feed those 8 voices in up to 3 effects slots and another EQ at the end of the chain. And microKORG 2 also has 3 vocal processors, a vocoder mode, a hard tune with auto-tune style effects, as well as a harmonizer. Though the voice count is lower when you use the vocal processors, 4 voices for the vocoder and a single hard tune voice and then 2 harmonizer voices. microKORG 2 is bitimbral, meaning you can load up to 2 different sets of sounds at a time. So for example, this is a bitimbral patch where you've got a pad on one timbre and then an arpeggiated pattern on a second timbre. Though in bitimbral mode you only get 4 voices per timbre, and you can only create layers, not splits. On the synthesis side, microKORG 2 is all digital, and while it's labeled as a virtual analog synth, it also supports various cross mods, including phase modulation or FM, and beside the basic shapes, its oscillators can go into single cycle waveform territory, as well as play one-shot samples chromatically, though these samples are more for transients, and you can't load up your own waveforms or samples. The workflow to get at the synth parameters is pretty simple. Each button lets you access a different set of parameters, and you can press a button multiple times to get to different tabs or pages within a module or section. The 5 pot knobs control whatever 5 parameters are displayed on screen, and then each preset gets a home page with 5 mappable parameters you've got quick access to. Under the screen are 5 contextual buttons, which may change based on what you're doing, and this one, the function one, is sort of like a shift, both for the contextual buttons and a few other things on the panel, like for example, going back up in parameter pages, so you can navigate back and forth that way, and also to see a parameter's value without changing it. The knobs are pots, not endless encoders, unfortunately, but you can choose a pickup mode in the settings so that parameters don't jump when you turn a knob, and you can also use the increase and decrease buttons to edit parameters that are in lists or to fine-tune parameters. These change the value of the last knob you touched. You can see that it's filled in, so that's how you choose what they control. Then you'll see across the panel these rectangles. This means you access additional parameters with a long press on that button, for example, looper settings or vocal processor settings. And then on-off acts kind of like a shift to select different vocal processing engines or activate effects slots. You'll typically see these animations on top to help you understand what it is you're controlling, but you can also bring up a scope. And then microKORG 2 has 256 preset slots. These are arranged in different categories with 4 banks per category and 8 presets per bank. You can also mark 8 favorites for quick access. microKORG 2 has an arpeggiator, though no sequencer, and interestingly it has a up to 43-second looper. So like I did in the intro, you can record a preset, swap presets, record another layer with a different preset, layer multiple sounds or even your vocals on it, and it has a handy undo. In terms of connectivity, microKORG 2 comes with a power adapter, but can also be powered by 6 AA batteries. It's got a USB-C device jack for MIDI, data transfer and firmware updates, but you can't power it over USB-C, and it doesn't send audio over USB either. It's got 1/4-inch unbalanced stereo and headphone outputs, a foot switch jack for sustain but not expression, and then 3 audio inputs, a 3.5mm stereo auxiliary input, which you can apply effects to and record into the looper, then a 3.5mm jack for the mic that comes bundled with the synth, and a 1/4-inch dynamic mic jack as well. You control mic levels with this knob on top, and you've got a clipping indicator over here, and there are plenty of mic input settings to help you gate out noise and control the threshold. You can pass the mic audio through into the synth, apply effects to it, and of course run it through the vocal processor. The bundled mic sounds okay if you speak up real close to it, but if you step back, levels drop dramatically. The microphone doesn't come with a pop filter, so you might need to improvise something or use the high-pass filter. It's okay for casual and playful use, but if you want to use these a lot, you might want to consider getting a dynamic mic and plugging it in the back. In terms of build, microKORG 2 feels solid. It has a plastic enclosure, and then the top and sides are metal plates. The keys are velocity sensitive, but there's no aftertouch. They're a bit wider than the original microKORG, but only 8 centimeters deep compared to some other key beds which have longer keys. The keys aren't spongy though, like the original. Overall, I'd say they're okay. That's it for the overview. Let's dive in and look at the details, and I'll start with the oscillators with 4 basic virtual analog shapes: saw, square, triangle, and sine, with a shaping option for each. Saw morphs into a saw an octave higher. Square lets you control pulse width. Triangle morphs into one an octave and a fifth higher. And sine adds harmonics by slightly clipping or distorting the waveform. And then you've got 64 DWGS, basically single cycle waveforms for the most part. You can see their names and categories on screen. They start with synth signs, a few octave versions, fifths, low res, digital, instruments like pianos and organs, synthbox, and airy. You can't crossfade between these, so they are literally just single cycle waveforms, but you can apply oscillator cross mods to them. More on that in a bit. And then the last oscillator category is one-shots. These are samples in a few categories: clicks, percussion. By the way, they're playable chromatically. Anyway, percussion, Foley. These are full samples, not single cycle waveforms. These are all one-shots, though some of them can get a bit long. So they're nice on their own, or paired as transients with other oscillators. While they are playable chromatically, you can't swap them in or out. You can't also swap out the single cycle waveforms. You can't import your own, and they don't have a sustain stage. They'll just die down at whatever length they're set. So those are the basic shapes, and like I mentioned, besides that, you've got cross mods where oscillator 3 can be used as a cross mod for either oscillator 1 or oscillator 2. There are a few cross mod options: ring, sync, ring and sync, and then VPM, phase modulation, or FM. And the waveforms and frequencies you choose for them are relevant, of course. So say a ring mod from saw into saw would sound like this. And if we set them to different frequencies, then more metallic craziness can ensue. So that's a ring mod. Then there's, like I mentioned, sync and ring and sync, and then VPM or FM, which I think is very interesting. So this is great for those FM style sounds. And of course, you can modulate the mod depth. Then alongside the three oscillators, you've got a noise generator. Spoiler alert, I'll need to increase its level in the mixer. And there are a couple of nice options here. You can choose the color of the noise, or basically filtering, and the filter type. High pass filter, band pass filter, and decimator. These additional three controls on the noise page, by the way, aren't related to noise. Rather, they let you toggle whether the oscillators follow the keyboard or not. So you can set them to a fixed frequency and have them drone or modulate at that frequency. So those are the oscillators. Moving on down the signal chain, we already saw the mixer. Let's take a listen to the filter. It's a morphing multi-mode filter, which means we get quite a few subtractive sculpting features. Morph starts at a 24 dB per octave low-pass filter. Sounds pretty nice, I think. Of course, with resonance, which does decrease bass a bit. And for those interested, it does self-oscillate. Doesn't crunch much, but does what can be expected from a filter. And then, like I mentioned, the filter morphs into a more open 12 dB per octave option. Still with resonance. And then continues to morph to a bandpass filter. Again with resonance. And then into a 12 dB per octave high pass and a sharper slope 24 dB per octave high pass filter. And for those of you asking, there's only one filter and you can't feed one timbre into another, which would have been cool. So those are the three basic filter parameters. And then there's pre-filter drive. So drive into the filter. And keyboard tracking up to 200% or even negative key tracking. So you can have the filter open up or even play the filter chromatically if you want. If you want post-filter drive, by the way, you can do that in the mod effects slot. Okay, let's move on and talk about the envelopes. You've got an amplitude envelope, ADSR, simple, with velocity sensitivity, and then a filter envelope. So you set intensity, either positive or negative. You can hear the slope there. You can't change the slope, unfortunately. It's pretty snappy, but so maybe add some resonance. But yeah, you can't change the slope. And you can map any of these to anything you want in the mod matrix, including setting the intensity to 0 and using the filter envelope for something completely different. And then beside the envelopes, you've got two LFOs. They're mostly identical, but a bit different. To hear what they do, you have to map them to something in the mod matrix or the patch matrix. The first slot is mapped by default to vibrato controlled by the mod wheel, so let's not mess with that. In the second slot, let's also map LFO1 to control the filter cutoff. Where are you at? Here we go. And you need to turn on mod matrix slots. So now we've got LFO1 controlling the filter cutoff frequency. Let's take a look at LFO1's parameters. You've got the usual suspect shapes: triangle, saw down, saw up, square, and sample and hold. You can sync the LFO to tempo or have it in one-shot mode, which is pretty cool for sample and hold because it'll set a different value per key press, and then frequency can get fairly high. And a cool feature for LFO1 is you can smoothen it for all the shapes, by the way. And you can have the LFOs be per voice or per timbre. And then LFO2 is very similar to LFO1, except that instead of smoothing, it has a delay stage. And then moving on down the modules, we already saw the patch matrix. It only has 6 slots, which isn't a lot. However, it does let you use 2 sources to control a single destination, something you can't do on all synths. So for example, if I wanted to moderate this modulation, say with the mod wheel, then you'd no longer hear it unless the mod wheel was also engaged. I much prefer this layout to other mod matrices that may have more slots, but then you've got to use one slot to modulate the mod depth of another. And then last but not least for the mod matrix, you've got both interesting sources, including analog, which is per key randomization that can be used for multiple things, including a vintage-like effect where you slightly vary various parameters on a per voice basis, or for example, to spread the voices in the stereo field. Speaking of which, you've got many destinations to explore here, including again something that you don't get on many synths, which is the option to modulate effect parameters. Speaking of which, let's take a listen and look at the effects. You've got 3 effects slots with different effects types per slots. You can activate all of them if you like, or any at a time. And with a long press on routing, you can also choose to feed each of the timbres into different steps within the signal chain, either through all 3 effects, through the delay and reverb, or just the reverb. Same goes for the microphone. Same goes, by the way, for the auxiliary input. You don't see that here because that's a global setting, and you actually have a few more options here. You can have the auxiliary input audio come in after the looper as well. So those are the routing options. Let's go into the various effects and effect options. So this is our raw tone, just so we have a reference. And then chorus, with of course various parameters, including subtypes. And other parameters you can play with. So maybe turn off the arpeggiator for a bit. And effects also have 2 pages of parameters. So for example here, you can filter out the effect. Anyway, that's the chorus and flanger, again with its parameters. Ensemble. Phaser. Also with 2 pages of parameters. And then tremolo, which is no slouch, as you can see. It's kind of like another LFO. And then lo-fi, with its set of parameters. And a compressor. Won't go over its parameters, but it's got those. Distortion, with different types of distortion. So can get nice and nasty. And then an amp simulator, again with various models. I think these sound really nice. So those are the mod effects. Let's turn them off and explore the delay effects. These include stereo and ping pong. Even more stereo. Of course with their parameters. Tape echo, that's really asking for us to increase feedback. And of course, play with time. And then pitch shift. Reverse. And low res. Interesting options for delays. And then the reverbs. We've got Hall. Sounds a bit metallic and springy, so not like the big lush reverbs on other Korgs and other synths. But I guess has its character. And then there's room, spring. This is actually bigger than the Hall. Nice one. Rust. Pitch shift. So this is like a shimmer. And low res. So those are the reverbs. And then at the end of the signal chain, you've got an EQ, which I may not have mentioned if it didn't also have a feedback option. Both positive and negative, which inverts the phase. So if your sounds don't have enough bass or are too muddy, try the EQ and spice it up with feedback. Okay, let's move on and talk about the arpeggiator. It's got 2 pages of parameters. Let's go through them quickly. There's swing, relative resolution for when your tempo synced to something else, and then you can target either both timbres or just one of them. Of course, there's latch, which you can also do with a long press on this button. And then the second page of parameters lets you choose the arpeggiator type. Usual suspect shapes, including a few interesting ones. Octaves. Gate time. And then last step is an interesting one. So you've got up to 8 steps, and you can choose to skip steps in the pattern. So that's a fun one to create evolving patterns. And then you want key sync to be off so that when you're latched, then chord changes will stay in sync. Okay, let's move on and take a look at the loop recorder. You've got 2 page settings for it. You need to set a loop length in bars or beats, which is a function of the tempo as well. So you can't say play a phrase and then hit a button and have that start looping. You've got a metronome though, so that helps stay in time. Metronome level is on the second page of arpeggiator parameters, along with a stutter effect, which we'll get to. You can have a count in if you want. So if you hit play, you'll get the metronome, and then you can start recording, and it'll automatically overdub so you don't have to record in the first pass or in any pass. And that's basically how you record into the loop. You can play different presets into the loop, but by default, if you swap presets and the tempo changes within the preset, then the speed of the loop will change based on the tempo. Right now we're getting all 120, but say, yeah, if it's 140, then it'll play much faster, or if it's 100, it'll play much slower. So this will slow down the loop. However, you can avoid this if you long press this button, tempo lock on program change, and then you can swap presets without worrying about tempo changes. You've got a few looping quality modes, so you can stick with stereo or mono, and there are a few lo-fi options as well. And if the metronome annoys you, you can also set keyboard triggering. So in this case, if I hit record, it won't start recording until I press a key. I can play an arpeggiated pattern. And that'll keep time for me. I could have then reduced the metronome level. What else? There's an undo if you don't like what you recorded, and also a redo. And then there's a stutter function, which in this pattern might not do much, but basically it's a micro loop of a certain segment of the loop. And it has a reverse option as well. It's a bit hard to control, but sometimes fun. I'll replay the live looping session from the intro at the end of this video so you can see how that progresses, swapping presets and so on. And like I mentioned, you can record vocoded audio and external audio into the looper. The only thing is you can't save loops onto the device and you can't export them either. So if you're working on your masterpiece while looping, have a recorder running in the background. Also, I tested this with MIDI sync and an external clock, and while the arpeggiator worked well, I couldn't get the looper to stay in time. That may of course be the fault of what I was using as clock lead, but if that type of functionality is important to you, further testing will be needed. Okay, let's move on and talk about the vocal processor. It has 3 engines, a vocoder, hard tune, which is like auto tune, and a harmonizer, which adds additional 2 pitch shifted copies of your voice. You can use either the vocoder with 4 voices, not 8, or the hard tune and the hard tune and harmonizer combined, but not all 3 at the same time. And there's an important global setting for the vocal processor, which you access with a long press on one of these buttons, and that's whether you want it to work in keyboard mode, where it will vocode or tune or harmonize based on the keys you pressed, or in scale mode, where it will automatically detect the pitch of your voice and use that as MIDI notes fed into the synth engine. When you do that, you can set the key for pitch detection as well as any one of a number of scales. That's particularly useful for people like me who can't carry a tune. So these are global vocal processing settings for all 3 engines. Let's start with keyboard mode and the vocoder, which is what you typically see in other vocoders. So in this mode, you play a chord and speak into the microphone. To increase intelligibility, you can mix in the microphone. Hello, 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 hello. And play around with form and shifting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. For resonance, resonance, resonance. The envelope follower determines how quickly the vocoder responds to your voice, and you can also crank it up to hold a formant or vowel. Hello, 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 hello. And the sound design going on in the synth matters a lot here. So for example, this is a basic sawtooth waveform. Vocoder. But I could go into the synth and change that completely. Vocoder. Hello, 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 vocoder. Hello, hello. This is a 16-band vocoder, and if you really want to, you can go ahead and, on a band-by-band basis, control its level and it's panning. So quite a few customization options here. Okay, so that was keyboard mode, where it doesn't matter which pitch I sing in. The only thing that was important was which notes I played. However, if I go into global setting and change it to scale, it doesn't matter what I play, the pitch that I sing at matters. By your command. So that's the vocoder. Let's move on to hard tune or auto tune. In keyboard mode, this will match what I sing to the note that I play on the keyboard. By your command. So it'll shift the note that I sing into the pitch that I play. And this is monophonic, by the way, so you can't play chords here. The more interesting mode for auto-tune is automatically tuning your voice to a scale, and then you've got a few parameters to control this. You don't need to play any keys in scale mode, just sing into the microphone. Intensity sets how strict you want the auto-tune effect to be. In my case, the more the better. 0 is no hard tune, and then the lower, the more natural your voice will sound. Da 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 da. And then speed sets how quickly pitch correction kicks in. Again, in my case, the faster the better. Of course, the more time you give it, the more natural it will sound. And then formants are fun. This is no formant shift.
This is what happens when you shift it down.
And this is shift up.
So that's hard tune. And then the harmonizer lets you add 2 pitch shifted copies of your voice. It can be used in conjunction with hard tune or not. So it sounds like this. Hello. You can set to have 1 or 2 harmonies and the interval for each of them. And all that is in scale mode. If we go into keyboard mode, then you can play the 2 harmony pitches on the keyboard. Hello. With the hard tune, that's 3 notes. So that's it for hard tune and the harmonizer. Unfortunately, you can't play the synth and sing into it at the same time, but you can, say, record the synth into a loop and then sing over it with auto-tune or hard tune or the harmonizer and add additional layers. Okay, moving on, let's take a look at a few voice settings. The first page lets you control whether you want a single timbre in your patch or to have a dual timbre patch, in which case you can use this button to control which timbre it is you're editing, and a long press to control timbre levels and panning. And then if we go to an init preset, then you can also set unison in here, along with detune and spread. And if you use fewer than 8 voices, then you can play, say, either 2 unison notes, or 3 or 4. Then the pitch page lets you control portamento, pitch bend range, among other things. And this page is where you assign which parameters are controlled on the home screen. So for example, if I didn't want to change tempo here, I'd go and assign that to anything else, and then this would appear on the home screen. Okay, let's move on and talk about the trophies page. Now, for some reason, this feature annoyed a lot of people in the comment section of my previous video, so I'll start by saying this in no way limits the functionality of the synth. It's not like you need to unlock achievements to access synth features. It's for entertainment purposes only, and it's a shift function, so you're free to ignore it if you want. Korg isn't sharing publicly what you need to do to unlock these, so for example, I have no idea what I did wrong to not unlock this one, but for the ones that you did unlock, you can hit info and see what it is you did to earn that. Some aren't as simple as this one, but I'll let you discover the others on your own. Finally, let's take a quick look at the global parameters. I'm not going to go over all of these. I already mentioned the auxiliary input routing. Then you've got a few control settings, microphone settings, and a curious feature here. Remember I said there's automatic pitch detection here. If you want, you could send the detected pitch out as MIDI, and there's a useful MIDI filter page. Okay, let's take a look at pros and cons for microKORG 2, and pros and cons should always be looked at relative to the competition at a similar price. I think the 3 main relevant synths to look at are the ASM Hydrasynth Explorer, Arturia's MiniFreak, and Korg's own Minilog XD, and if you don't have to have keys, an old favorite, Waldorf's Blofeld. The biggest pros for microKORG 2, meaning things you won't find on its competitors, are, I think, the looper, which may inspire you to create music in ways a sequencer doesn't, and the vocal processing unit along with the microphone, though you might want to get a better one for non-casual use. microKORG 2 is also bitimbral, something most of its competitors aren't, although it doesn't support splits, only layers. Further on the pros for microKORG 2 is that I think it's very easy to use, and interface is a big deal on synths. There's a certain friendliness to it. I think the combination of the animations and the visualization, there's something about it very much unlike the original microKORG, which makes it very approachable for sound design. However, it does have significantly fewer hands-on controls compared to its competitors, something that's a bit of a shame in light of the amount of real estate that the program selector takes up. Its mod matrix is also no slouch. I talked about this earlier, the fact that there is a controller for every slot means a lot in terms of ease of use. There's a very generous list of mod destinations, which will make you wish for more slots and more modulators for sure. Then on the cons side, beside the fact that it doesn't have plenty of knobs like its competitors, the thing that most bothered me when using it was the fact that the knobs are pots and not endless encoders. So you either need to put them in catch-up mode and find the current value for whatever it is you're doing, or just accept that parameters will jump when you turn a knob. Now you can hold this button and turn a knob to see the parameters value or to select it and then edit it using the increase and decrease buttons, but that doesn't work well for continuous parameters. I think at the very least they should add a scale mode. So right now in control, you can pick jump or catch. A scale mode would let you immediately pick up a parameter from wherever the knob is and gradually change it to its destination without any jumps. Then on the synth engine side, while the different waveforms and single cycle waveforms and one-shots are nice, some other synths have either full wavetable capabilities or a broader selection of multiple synth engines like physical modeling or custom engines like on MiniFreak, which also has analog filters, though only 6 voices compared to 8 here. Other synths also may have more LFOs and envelopes, and on the effects side, while the mod and delay effects are great, and the reverb has a few interesting options, a spacious reverb is missing something some of its competitors have. So if you like that kind of thing, you'll need to add an external reverb. Furthermore, while the looper is cool and something I wish every synth would have, there's no sequencer in here. And then finally, the hard tune is a really nice feature, but you can't play a synth engine while it automatically corrects your voice. A workaround is to record a loop and then sing on top of that, but it's not the same thing. You also can't load up your own samples or single cycle waveforms in here. Now, you can't do that on most of its competitors either, so I'm not sure that applies as a con, just something I thought you should know. And the looper is really cool, but you can't save or export loops, and it doesn't support dynamic loop lengths. It would be great not to have to set your tempo and loop length in advance, as opposed to starting to play and setting a loop point whenever you want. There are also a few MIDI implementation and sync bugs. Hopefully those will be fixed in firmware updates. So to sum it up, I think we're spoiled for choice at this price range. I don't think getting any one of these is a mistake. Just go for the sounds and interface you find compelling. So that's it for microKORG 2, and if you were ever short on synthesis and mod matrix ideas, you might want to check out my ever-expanding book of electronic music ideas, tips, and tricks, available to the people who support this channel on Patreon. Hit like if this was useful, ring the YouTube bell below if you want to make sure you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.